We're about halfway through spring practice for Notre Dame football, so what have we learned about the team so far? And what's the latest on the injuries to Riley Leonard and Benjamin Morrison? That's next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, and welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. Today is Wednesday, April 3rd, and thank you for getting your day started right here by making this your first listen of the day. My name is Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports, and this show is free and available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. If you are watching along on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, or if you're listening to the podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe. Luke Smith returns to the show today to cover a wide range of topics, from Clarence Lewis's decision to transfer, the latest injury updates from Notre Dame, plus some thoughts about Notre Dame basketball and March Madness at the end. So let's get right to it. Let's bring in Luke. It is great to have Luke Smith back on the show, fresh off a week in Las Vegas, but unfortunately for him and for all of us, really, the Clarence Lewis CPA era at Notre Dame is officially over. Luke, as one of the biggest believers in Lewis, especially the past couple of years, how have you been coping with the news that he's transferring elsewhere?
One of the biggest. I might have been the only the last couple of years after he essentially was demoted in terms of how prominent he was within the Notre Dame defense. But you alluded to this earlier today on your episode. The timing is a little bit strange coming on the heels of Benjamin Morrison's shoulder surgery, but it maybe shouldn't surprise us that much. I think that Mike Mickens and the Notre Dame defensive coaching staff has really built cornerback into a position of strength to the point where there was conversation about Lewis potentially filling in as like a third safety. It is strange given how prominent he was on a Notre Dame defense that went to the college football playoff in 2020, and he lined up against Devonta Smith and all those other guys on Clemson in the ACC title game and in the regular season game. But it never really was quite the same for him after that second half of that Fiesta Bowl. And yeah, it was a heck of a run. He really gave us an incredible nickname on a past iteration of this show, but pour one out. So I'll be curious to see where he lands. I'm imagining, I don't even know where he's from. Isn't he from like somewhere out east?
Clarence Lewis, I think he is from New Jersey. Yeah. So he'll probably end up somewhere.
Maybe he's a Scarlet Knight. I'm an honorary alum of Rutgers, so maybe he'll end up there, but who knows?
Yeah, I think since this is probably going to be the last time that we ever talk about Clarence Lewis, we should clarify once again where the Clarence Lewis CPA nickname came from. I think it was as simple as Clarence is typically a name reserved for an accountant, not a cornerback, so that we just added the CPA to his name, and that was in 2020, and it has been a long time since. But that was at a time when he sort of surprised us all. He started getting playing time very early on in the season, and he was not a very highly rated recruit. He was not a prospect that was talked about very much in that fall camp. Now, granted, it was the COVID year, and I think everyone was just talking about whether or not teams are going to play. But he came out of nowhere, comes in, has a good freshman season like you alluded to, has a really good sophomore season as well, at least statistically, gets demoted, and then every year since, he has played less and less. And it made me think, like, he's got to have one of the weirdest career arcs of any recent Notre Dame player, someone who was actually good and didn't really get into any trouble, because I think another person who came to mind was Kavari Russell, because he shocked everyone when he came onto the scene, but then he missed a full season because of an academic scandal, and then he came back, and then he goes to the NFL draft, gets drafted in the third round, and then gets cut immediately, and then nobody really ever heard from him again. So it's a little bit different, but could you think of other players who maybe started off hot, and then it just never really got any better from there?
In terms of guys that didn't get in trouble, it's hard. Actually, one that kind of comes to mind, believe it or not, is Duval Kamara, maybe. Had a pretty good freshman year and was a pretty highly touted recruit. And then really, I think his freshman year was probably his best year at Notre Dame. And that was on a terrible team.
Yeah, that was partially due to necessity. He played
Yeah.
in 2007, and I think I'm looking at his stats now. Yeah, that's a good call. He had his most receptions in a single season during his freshman year. He had 4 touchdowns, and every year it got worse from there. But yeah, I actually remember when he came into Notre Dame, he was a player that a lot of people were talking about. People were really high on him because
He
that
also
class was really good.
might have been a New Jersey kid too, I think.
He was, yep.
But the thing that we were just talking about before we started this, and this is something that I thought about when it came out that he was going to transfer and just kind of seeing his career arc. A couple years ago, I looked it up. It was in April of 2021 during spring practice. We had Sean Crawford on the podcast on a past show, and we asked him about Clarence Lewis. This was coming on the heels of his freshman season. And I'm going to butcher this slightly, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but basically we asked him what made Clarence Lewis able to play so quickly and so well. And I just remember the response we got was not really like that much of an endorsement on Clarence Lewis. Like, it was more so just like we had no other options because Tariq Bracy had kind of just like had the yips at that moment, and we kind of didn't have another choice. And I remember that stuck with me, like, okay, well, I think we were looking for like, I think we maybe asked him to talk about Kavari Russell because he, of course, had been a freshman when Kavari Russell was a senior, and like the comparisons between them. And that was not the comparison we got. He was just like, yeah, he's Clarence. And that was kind of what he said from what I remember. So maybe the signs were there, and I don't know. Maybe Sean Crawford knew and didn't want to say anything way back then.
Yeah, you think about how thin that cornerback room was at the time. It actually makes sense that he did play as early as he did because the starters were Nick McLeod and Tariq Bracy, and they didn't even have Nick McLeod until May, just a couple months before the season actually started. And then behind those two was Clarence Lewis, who was a true freshman, and Cam Hart, who had just moved over from wide receiver. So on one hand, you're like, okay, it makes sense why he played so early, and it's also a reminder of just how bad Notre Dame was at the quarterback position just a few years ago.
It is, and it goes to show you how good of a job Mike Mickens has done in a pretty short period of time building that up. But yeah, like I said, I just remember that Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma State. He got torched in the second half, and I don't think he obviously had the nice pick 6 against Tennessee State this past year, but really outside of that, he was kind of just like out there, but not really doing a whole heck of a lot.
No, that Oklahoma State game was a tough day for Clarence. It was a tough day for DJ Brown, and definitely one of the most shocking second halves that we've experienced in our time as Notre Dame fans. But as we talk a lot about how bad the cornerback room used to be, I think it's a good segue into what it is now, and really the current situation now that Clarence Lewis is out the door and Benjamin Morrison is recovering from a shoulder surgery. So we still don't have a ton of new information about Benjamin Morrison. It does seem like he probably will be back in a few months, but Marcus Freeman hasn't spoken at a press conference since we found out that he had this surgery. So with Lewis out, Benjamin Morrison on the mend, what do you make of this cornerback room in its current state, like without those two players?
It's got to mean that they have a lot of faith in guys like Christian Gray and even Micah Bell, obviously Jaden Mickey. It's a deep room, like we just alluded to. And I would imagine that, I don't know if there's an inflection point within spring camp where maybe some of the more seasoned players get an honest read from the coaches on where they stand, but maybe that's what happened with Clarence Lewis. And maybe when he saw Benjamin Morrison go out and he was not getting those reps that he thought he might have and those younger guys were, that was all he needed to say, you know what, it's time to go elsewhere.
Yeah, that's kind of how I read it too, because once that happened, it didn't seem like he was going to get all the first team reps. But also Christian Gray, it does seem like they're going to prioritize field corner for him. I think some people thought that, well, if Morrison is out, then let's just move Gray over to boundary, and then he can get all the reps there because that's probably what his future is. Like, and pretty short future, as in next season, once Benjamin Morrison goes off to the NFL, Christian Gray is probably going to start at the boundary corner, but that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems like they're going to keep him at field corner and continue to battle with Jaden Mickey, which, you know, might mean a positive thing for Benjamin Morrison because they're like, okay, he's going to be back. We don't really need to waste any reps for Gray at boundary because he's going to be playing the field no matter what. But I also understand in Clarence Lewis's situation, like, he's a senior, he's been around, he's going into his 5th year, and then to see all these young guys who are just either sophomores or true juniors, like, if they're getting all the reps and you just have to sit on the sideline knowing that you started for this team a few years ago, it's probably time to move on and start somewhere else.
100%. So can't fault him on that front. Obviously, and you talked about this last week, hopeful that Benjamin Morrison's injury is really not that big of a deal. Wasn't a big fan of the way that press release was worded. It just worried me a little bit, but fingers crossed on that front.
So what was your issue with it? Because I didn't like how cryptic that last line was. And maybe they did it on purpose, but was that why you were concerned as well?
Exactly.
Yeah, just expected to return for the 2024 season is so vague, and it just leaves a lot of questions. But again, I'm sure that Marcus Freeman will clarify a lot of that. But at the same time, like I've said this many times before, the one thing that is most evident from the Brian Kelly era or Brian Kelly teaching and Marcus Freeman is the way that they talk about injuries, because it's always so positive and it's always so glowing. And then like we find out the reality and it's not nearly as optimistic as it was before.
Right. Now, I think as you just said, we actually haven't heard him speak about this yet, so who knows? But in terms of the framing of the prognosis, yeah, not ideal.
We'll be right back with Luke, but first I want to tell you about Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV also offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing television. And it provides access to millions of movies and television episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big professional leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels lets you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more to stay up to date on all the latest in the world of sports. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, and cooking videos as well. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices to learn more. Visit Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. All right, another injury that we have not talked about on the show together is Riley Leonard and sort of the obscure situation going on with his ankle, because he obviously hurt it pretty badly against Notre Dame last season. And to be honest, in the moment, that felt like an automatic season ender, just the way it looked, the way that he got rolled over. He decided to try to gut it out, play a few more games. He was clearly not healthy, looked awful in that Louisville game. And then they were like, okay, this isn't going to work. I don't understand why he didn't get surgery like that day that they decided to shut it down last season while he was at Duke. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't know if we'll ever know. Then he decides to get the cleanup surgery in January, I think it was. That made total sense. But now he's getting a cleanup to the cleanup, and he's driving around the Notre Dame practice on a little scooter, and that's not a great sign. So what do you make of the Riley Leonard situation as of today?
It's not great. 2 surgeries in a whatever week span just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's kind of like, what were you trying to do and pushing it? I also have to concede, and this, I don't even know if this is a concession, but I was pretty anti-Riley Leonard in the whole recruitment process. He was not at the top of my board. I'm sure there are airwaves you can go back and find where I say a lot more details about that, but this isn't helping my confidence in him, and not necessarily because of the injuries, but because he's not developing or having the time to develop chemistry with his receivers and become more accurate. That worries me a little bit, because I think he's far from a proven product in that respect.
Yeah, it's a little different than Sam Hartman, where you knew he was a finished product as a quarterback, but even he needed time to play with the offensive line and play with the wide receivers and at least try to develop some chemistry. And then you saw him come out firing out of the gates last season in that game against Navy, and he struggled in the big games. But Riley Leonard's situation is a lot different because, like you said, he's got a lot of work he needs to do on his own game, let alone his game with his teammates. So every single practice that he misses is important, and you know he's out for the rest of spring. we would hope that he's able to at least throw around with the guys in the summer. But I do think it's an interesting situation, and I don't really know what's going to happen with Steve Angeli, but I think a lot of people have speculated different things there as to how it affects the decision for the quarterbacks behind Leonard. How do you think it's going to play out?
I think selfishly for Notre Dame, it does help. I think it makes it a lot more realistic that they'll have 4 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster come fall camp, which I think I would have said was almost an impossibility prior to this. So we'll see how that plays itself out and see if that sustained itself even through fall camp. But I feel like Steve Angeli probably would have transferred by now if he was going to transfer. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. I mean, I guess I see your point, and I understand why Steve Angeli would be more inclined to stay at Notre Dame, because there is a higher probability that he will play this season because Riley Leonard continues to deal with these injuries. But I think if Angeli decides to stay, if you're Kenny Minchey, you're looking around like, when is it going to be my time? So I understand your point about Angeli, but I just feel like if he stays, referring to Angeli, then Minchey is almost certainly out the door.
It's a fair point. Now he is only a sophomore, I think he did maintain his red shirt last year, right?
Yeah.
So I get that that's not the era we live in, but that is a fact. He did maintain his red shirt, so I wouldn't completely rule it out. But you're right. I think that maybe that does make it more likely for Minchey to transfer. But who knows? Maybe getting more reps with the twos and more just regular reps will change that as well.
Yeah, and for the record, I'm really high on Minchey, and I think you are too. Like, this is not a situation where like, oh, he should leave, he's not any good. No, I think Kenny Minchey is really good, and I think I've said multiple times, I think that Kenny Minchey is the most likely person to start at Notre Dame in 2025, because I just figured, okay, this year is going to be the year of Riley Leonard. Steve Angeli is going to leave to start elsewhere. Kenny Minchey sticks around, and then a lot of people are anointing CJ Carr as the starter next year. And even though I think he's extremely talented, he's got a really bright future, I just feel like experience is so valuable now in college football that I don't think that CJ Carr is a sure thing to start next year at all.
You're right. I mean, as we know, we've done these exercises before. These 5-star quarterbacks, even though they're ranked 5 stars, are a crapshoot more times than not. So even though the early returns on him have been good, there's no guarantee that he'll be ready to start next year.
So we've kind of covered the 2 main storylines coming out of spring practice, and both are pretty negative for Notre Dame. But that's what happens when 2 of your most important players end up missing all of spring practice, or at least the vast majority of spring practice, due to an injury. Are there any other developments that you've read or heard about that you feel a little bit more positive about from spring practice?
I do feel like we've heard some good things about the freshman receivers, particularly Micah Gilbert. It sounds like he's just ready to play. I think related to that freshman line, Bryce Young sounds like he could play right now too. So that's very positive. I think as Notre Dame has built up its depth in the defensive backfield, I'd like to see a similar sort of depth collection be built along the defensive line, and hopefully guys like Bryce Young can help to make that possible. But outside of that, trying to not read into anything too much, but when you hear things about guys like that are so young and seem to just fit in seamlessly, that's always a good thing.
The nice thing about Micah Gilbert is that he doesn't have to play. It's not like last year where Notre Dame absolutely needed Jaden Greathouse and Rico Flores to be out there. This is a situation where, like, hey, if Micah Gilbert is good enough to play, they can fit him in. And if he starts to run into that freshman wall, which happens with guys, then they have plenty of guys who are older and a little bit more experienced, albeit some of them at different levels of college football, like a guy like Chris Mitchell. Bo Collins played for Clemson, so he's obviously been playing at the top. But I still think, I have my skepticism about the wide receivers just because the room has been so bad for so long. And even though I'm certainly optimistic about what Jaden Harrison could do, Bo Collins, Chris Mitchell, and what Jane Thomas and Jane Greathouse can do when they're healthy, like, I'm excited about that room, but I also don't want to get too excited because I feel like I've just been let down so many times in the past few years.
100%. And that's why it's best to go in with no expectations at all, and just see whatever happens, happens. And if it's great, it surprises you. If it's bad, well, I guess we predicted that anyways.
I love it. Just set the bar so impossibly low that you can't be disappointed. But the transfer portal is opening up here in a couple weeks for undergraduate students. And there has been some rumors and some talk in like the college football media space. And, you know, granted, it is late March, early April when these discussions are being had. There really isn't a ton to talk about in the college football world this time of year, so maybe some of it is a little bit overblown, but people seem to believe that this upcoming transfer portal cycle is going to be as crazy, if not more, than the one that happened this past December. I think that's probably a stretch because it's shorter and most of the guys have already moved, but are you concerned at all that Notre Dame could be affected by that?
Personally, I'm not. I'm sure they will lose guys. I think, didn't they lose something like 11 in this window last year? Is that right?
Was it 11?
Maybe it was 9. I don't know. It was a bigger number than you would think. And I think as it bore out, none of those guys really ended up being big producers at the next step. I think that probably the best producer of anybody that Notre Dame lost last year was Logan Diggs, and he himself is transferring again. So, you know, you kind of weigh that with what it is. You alluded to this when we were talking about this earlier. I think we've entered a stage where there's just always going to be one guy that you don't expect to lose, and you probably want to lose, and they end up losing. Maybe that already happened with Rico Flores, but maybe it happens again. I don't know who that might be. I'm not too concerned about them losing a bunch of guys, and really I think this is just part of roster management in 2024.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a possibility. I don't want to go out here and say, yeah, Notre Dame is totally fine. They're not going to lose anyone, because the moment I say that, they'll probably lose two starters in the portal like the next day.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised, obviously, if a quarterback left. We've already talked about that. That kind of falls into the Tyler Buckner thing last year. But a player like Logan Diggs is a little bit different because he had tried to get out of Notre Dame like 3 times prior when he actually did. I don't really think there's been that many other players on the current Notre Dame roster who have done that. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not entirely in the loop on that stuff. But when he made the decision to leave, on the surface, it was like, what are you doing? You're going to get carries. But then you're like, look, this has been going on for years. It's not really that surprising. Whereas this year, if there's a starter, like a true starter, not a guy who's like going to get reps. I'm talking about a guy who is going to start day one for Notre Dame at College Station. I would be pretty surprised. I feel like Marcus Freeman definitely has the culture in a really good place right now. And if a couple guys leave, I'm not going to be like, oh, the sky's falling. I do think that it's just sort of the nature of the beast these days. So I'm feeling optimistic that Notre Dame will be able to retain most of their guys, but I do think that they should be pretty active at looking at potential acquisitions in the transfer portal. Are there any positions that you think Notre Dame needs more now that you've been able to watch them a little bit so far in spring practice?
So I think you can always add along the defensive line, and I think a defensive tackle, just because they have 2 of the best defensive tackles in the country in Riley Mills and Howard Cross. But after those guys, there's a lot of unproven assets. So I would like to see them add somebody, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be a guy who's going to get a ton of snaps, but somebody who can take 10, 15 snaps a game. I think that would be helpful. There's been some conversation about Notre Dame potentially going after an offensive lineman, a tackle. I think Kane Madden is the only offensive lineman transfer into Notre Dame I can remember in a really long time. And I think that that's kind of the nature of that room. It seems very close-knit. Maybe they don't like outsiders that much. And maybe it's different under Joe Rudolph. I don't know, but that's just sort of the sense I got. Like when you were on campus, you always saw offensive linemen together, and they really bonded. And I don't see these guys taking well to somebody new coming in. And I think the Kane Madden thing, well, he actually wasn't very good, but I think it worked out for the chemistry of the room because he was an older guy and they were all pretty young, but they don't do that very often is my point. So I don't see them going that route. The one last position that they've talked about is tight end. Again, they have so much talent in that room. It's a matter of it staying healthy. So I don't mind if they get a depth piece here, but I don't know what that looks like. Doesn't everybody want a tight end who can contribute at the college level? I would think so.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised that they didn't even seem to entertain Ben Urasek, the tight end from Stanford, who was in the portal for a long time ended up going to Georgia. It felt like if Notre Dame expressed some interest there, maybe he'd have a chance to go to Notre Dame. And yeah, it probably hurt some feelings in the tight end room, but hell, dude, Jurasek is a good, proven player, and Notre Dame has about like a combined 18 ACL tears in that single tight end position room. So I would have liked to see them go after someone like who has that level of ability. Doesn't seem like there's going to be anyone of that caliber in this upcoming portal cycle, but you never really know. When it comes to offensive tackle, it does seem like whatever position battle was going on at right tackle is all but over. Now, I should probably not get ahead of myself now because we thought that was the case last spring, and then out of nowhere, Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler are starting at the guard positions in the season opener.
Yep.
But it does seem like Tosh Baker certainly has the lead over Emil Wagner at the right tackle spot. I don't even know if anyone's competing with Charles Jagusah. It doesn't really seem like they are. So if Notre Dame is going to look for a tackle in the transfer portal, I feel like it has to be a starter, like an obvious starter. And the Kane Madden situation, it's so funny. It gives me pause on any incoming transfer from a Group of 5 school because, like, people kind of forget. There was a lot of hype around Kane Madden. That was a big acquisition at the time.
PFF All-American.
Yeah, that's right. Wasn't he like first team too?
Yeah.
And then he played one snap and you're like, oh, he can't move at all. At all.
Nope.
So, sometimes when guys make that jump from the Group of 5 to Notre Dame or really any good Power 5 program, it doesn't always work out. I mean, hell, last year when Antonio Carter committed to Notre Dame, there was like high hopes for him, and I don't even think he could crack the 2 deep. So I don't really know who would be out there for Notre Dame at offensive tackle either. But as for the defensive line, I see your point. I feel like it's entirely dependent on what happens with Gabriel Rubio. To be honest, I haven't really talked to you about this, but I feel like it's kind of strange, right? Like, when was the last time Notre Dame had a player who left the team and left the university, but then showed up at a practice and everyone's like, oh yeah, he'll be back this summer? Like, usually if it's something that involves university, it usually involves academics, and that player is just like nowhere to be seen until he comes back. But I don't know. That's just kind of how I interpreted it.
I think the answer to that question is Jaron Grant showing up at the ACC tournament in 2013-14 after being suspended from school for academics, spending some time away from the school. So I guess that means Gabriel Rubio is going to basically be the equivalent of the Conference Player of the Year next year. But that's the only one I can think of. So I'm assuming it was something academic. But it also sounds like he was still living in South Bend, so I don't really know.
Yeah, if he comes back, and Notre Dame certainly needs him to come back because the guys behind Cross and Mills, like, there's a lot of young, talented players like Donovan Heinisch. They seem pretty high in Brennan Vernon, but it's still some time. And also that position is one that you kind of need like a grown-ass man playing. Like, there are not that many true freshman defensive tackles who come in physically ready to take on the beating that position requires and be a good player. So Notre Dame is not in that position now, but depending on the status of Gabriel Rubio, I think they should probably look to add a Chris Smith level defensive tackle as well. Also, it's funny that we bring up Chris Smith because I just saw a video going around that I totally forgot. He benched like 225 42 times at the pro day.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
I mean, like, just that alone, he has some sort of record at Notre Dame, despite the fact that he wasn't really that prominent of a player. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. The sports calendar is loaded, and FanDuel's making it even more exciting to get in on the action because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet the tourney, MLB, NBA, NHL, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a big win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, we've talked a lot about college football. Let's talk some hoops. Carri Booth, one of Notre Dame's, I don't want to say one of their best freshmen because he really didn't play that well in his freshman season, but certainly one who had, or at least we all think has, a lot of potential. Carri Booth has since entered the transfer portal. He said he's leaving open the option of returning to Notre Dame. I don't think anyone expects that to happen. So just point blank, how big of a loss is this for Micah Shrewsbury's squad?
It's a big loss. He was probably the only guy on the current roster with any NBA potential, although there was that one game this year that Eric Devendorf was calling where he said like 8 guys on the court between Notre Dame and whoever the other below 500
It's like
ACC
Georgia
team
Tech.
Yeah. He, I think, legitimately has the frame and potential for it. This is something I had kind of feared for a while, just going back to January where he wasn't playing as much. Knowing how involved his dad is in the world of basketball, I could have foreseen this. Now, I thought that Shrewsbury had really just challenged him early on and said, you kind of need to fix some things and then you'll start playing more. And I felt like he had responded in that way and he was getting minutes by the end of the season, but for whatever reason, he's looking elsewhere. And that's unfortunate because I think he has an opportunity to have a really good sophomore season this coming season.
Yeah, when he wasn't starting at the beginning of the year, I was like, this is weird because, he's the top 50 prospect. But then you look at his age and you're like, oh, yeah, this guy should be a senior in high school. Mm-hmm. It makes sense that it's probably going to take a little bit of time before Micah Shrewsbury trusts him to, run 24 to 28 minutes out there. So he ends up averaging 20 minutes per game. Definitely played a lot more the second half of the year. But I'm with you. I think this is a big loss. And what concerns me is I don't really know how Notre Dame is going to backfill his spot, just given the fact that Notre Dame isn't able to be as active in the transfer portal. I think they've definitely made some strides there, but like Notre Dame is always going to be a developmental program, so you need guys to come in and stick around, and then to lose a guy like Booth, it's just going to be tough. And I know they've got a pretty good recruiting class coming in, but I don't think that a guy like Carri Booth is a player that Notre Dame is going to be able to go out and add in the transfer portal. Like they already needed a veteran big, and now they need a young big who might still be a little bit raw, but has potential to be impactful, maybe next year, a couple years down the road.
It'll be really interesting to see how Notre Dame is able to adapt in this new era of college basketball, because I feel like in college basketball, even more so than in college football, teams are going to have to get used to having 75% new roster every year. And it'll be interesting to see if Notre Dame is equipped to handle that or willing to handle that even from an administrative level. I would like to think that they are, given the money and the contract they gave Micah Shrewsbury, but we'll have to see.
Yeah. Do you think that Notre Dame is going to be able to add enough players in the portal this offseason to compete for a tournament next season? Because I know when we were talking about them before the season started, you were on the more optimistic side. You said they could be back for the tournament next year. But the way I look at it, they won 13 games this past season. I think they would have to win like 23 next season to have a shot. I think that's exactly what Virginia had. So that'd be a 10-win difference. And losing a guy like Booth, it just seems like a lot. So I think they're probably going to be in contention right now. But as of today, in early April of 2024, they got a lot of ground to make up if they want to be back in the tournament next season.
Totally. And the Booth loss hurts, but we'll see. We'll see what they're able to do. It sounded like they were in early on a guy from UMass who ended up committing to Arkansas. So I haven't really heard a whole lot else about who they may or may not be in on. Admittedly, a lot of guys probably aren't in the portal yet, so we'll see what happens. I will say they won 13 games. It should have been 14, and if they had won that 14th, we wouldn't have to deal with this BS NC State story right now, because Notre Dame choked that game away.
You got any more thoughts on NC State?
Yeah, I can't stand them. Going to Raleigh this year, NC State fans are among the worst I've ever encountered, just completely classless, pretty trashy, and they don't deserve this run at all. DJ Burns is not entertaining to me at all. He's also from the class of 2018, so there is that too. He's Zion Williamson's age. Like, he shouldn't be playing college basketball. And people are ripping on Baycott for still being in college as a fifth year. He's a sixth-year senior. So, anyways, I hope they get throttled this week, because I am so sick of watching that team play. And shout out Kevin Keats for gaming the system. Should have been fired, but he's got an extension now.
I was just going to ask if you had any final thoughts on the NCAA tournament before I let you go. I would just say I've been so into this NCAA tournament so far. Hell, last weekend I went to 3 tournament games. I went to this 2 Sweet 16 games in LA, and then I was like, that was a lot of fun. I'm going to run it back. Go to Clemson, Alabama in the Elite Eight. It was a ton of fun, and I just feel like it's been a lot of fun so far, but this Final Four is the chance to be like a complete dud, because I just think UConn is just going to roll whoever they face.
Yeah, I think that's the reality of it. It's pretty wild, but they just seem to be head and shoulders above the pack. And we'll see how Purdue matches up with them, assuming that's what happens, but I don't think it's going to be pretty.
All right. Well, we'll leave it at that, Luke. Next time we talk to you, hopefully we got some more positive news to talk about, and just RIP to the Clarence Lewis CPA era. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Wow. Well, maybe I'll do my taxes someday. That's all I can talk about now.
Okay, that is going to do it for today's episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. We got recruiting coverage coming tomorrow, so be sure to tune in for that. And remember to get your mailbag questions in if you want to be featured on Friday's episode. You can drop them in the YouTube comments, tweet them at Locked On Irish, or slide in the Instagram DMs at Locked On Irish Pod. Also, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, and I'll see you tomorrow.